It's kind of like a Monopoly game. I mean, there's never like a series of Monopoly that goes through the same way. It's never replicated the same way. There's just, the die can get dropped in so many different numbers that it changes, and industries are the same way. So that's why anytime that I feel like I'm competing or I'm coming from a place of scarcity, that's when I know it's an opportunity to reflect and say, okay, like, hey, where do I need to create and get back to this? And I've hit ceilings in different sectors where I was like, oh, I've been creative in the same way for too long, where it becomes basic economy. I'm doing what everybody else is doing. They caught up or I caught up, where I need to break some things. I need to stop doing some things that were giving me affirmation.
Welcome to the 3 O'Clock Coffee Podcast, a place where extraordinary people network together to share meaningful stories that inspire others. Do you have a great story you would like to share with the world? If so, go to 3o'clockcoffee.com and sign up today to be on our show. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to click the subscribe button and tell a friend about the 3 O'Clock Coffee Podcast.
Well, good morning or good afternoon. Once again, it's time for 3 O'Clock Coffee. And as usual, I always believe somebody has an extraordinary story. And my friend Mathew Thomas, who we are both involved with, an amazing business coach called, his name is Benjamin Dr. Hardy. Just amazing. We became fast friends. It's just an amazing group of people and extraordinary people. And Mathew, we're going to meet Mathew. Mathew is, get this. So Mathew served in Iraq in Operation Freedom. He's a decorated Marine Corps machine gunist. Okay. And he talks about it so casually, like it was just something that he did in time. And I'll let him tell you his story, but fast forward today, he renovated his office. And he's in an old church, and his address is called Old Battleground. It's like just an extraordinary story about being your future self. So let's walk into the cafe and let's meet my friend Mathew. I think he just has an extraordinary story. So come on in. Everybody, this is Mathew Thomas, my good friend, and he met us here at the cafe. Thanks for joining us, Mathew.
Scott, thanks for being here.
Hey, before we dig in, I always seem to forget. I get so excited about talking to people. But can I buy you a cup of coffee, and what kind of coffee do you drink?
Please. I love it. I have kind of a specific coffee, how I make it. So I get black, I put collagen in it, I put butter in it, I let that sit. I have a special little blender. I make sure there's a froth to it, and then I put cacao powder in it as well. So it eventually starts turning into a protein shake, but that's how I have my coffee in the mornings.
So, Mathew, what you don't know is I've been doing this about 10 years, and I ask people, what do they drink for coffee? I kid you not, I think every time I ask somebody this question, I get a different answer. It's amazing. That does sound like a protein shake. Is that like what they call a bullet time?
So, yeah, bulletproof. So it's kind of, to me, it's like an upgraded version of bulletproof. So like a bulletproof coffee is typically just black coffee with butter in it. I like to fast in the morning, but it kind of breaks it. But I put in chocolate collagen. And then I'm a huge Laird Hamilton fan. And so Laird Hamilton came out with a cacao powder that I put in it as well. That's all I have. I don't eat till usually after 11 o'clock.
I actually met I don't know if you know him, Dave, and I'm going blank on his last name.
Asprey.
Asprey, yeah. He was in Strategic Coach, which I'm involved with Dan Sullivan. And I met him through Strategic Coach. And it was like amazing that the guy that developed Bulletproof Coffee is in one of my workshops. And it was just an amazing conversation I had with Dave. Dave's an extraordinary individual. Oh my God. Can't wait to get him on the podcast. Talk about an amazing individual.
Yeah, what I like about Dave is, so like his background, there's a lot of like computing, and even genetically, a lot of his family members are engineers. And so I think it's fascinating because he took that skill set and built it, and then he put it towards the human body. And so my life really changed when I read his book, Superhuman. I fanboyed on him so hard. I went up to him in Genius Network and I was like, I did the fasting. I'm like, my brain turned on. I released all this like emotional trauma that I had through eating, like breads and those foods for comfort. It's amazing what your body can do when you get out of its own way.
Yeah, right. If the people listening, Genius Network is by Joe Polish, who's like the king of marketing and networking. And so many people, unique people you meet in his program called Genius Network, which is, the last time I went was pre-pandemic in 2019. You were probably there, Mathew, when I was there in Arizona in 2019.
Yeah, I was joining kind of right at that time.
Okay. right?
Yeah.
Right. So Dave was at the annual workshop. You probably saw Dave there, right? The
Yeah.
CEO of Bulletproof. And he's walking around with these blue glasses in the middle of the conference. Do you remember this? He's walking around with these blue glasses. And like, who's this guy, right?
He's just trying to preserve his mitochondria and keep his circadian rhythm, in check. So yeah, he always rocks those.
Yeah. Anyways, little diversion tour. But when you meet somebody that actually developed a coffee company, I'm intrigued as well. So, but back to you. So we've had conversations. You mentioned like, oh yeah, I was in Iraq, I was in the Marine Corps, and yeah, I was just a machine gunist. Like, walk me through that. How can I get my head around this? Because my visual of you being in Iraq and in the Marine Corps and that time during, Operation Freedom, because I remember that time. I remember watching the news. I was a news junkie. I could talk all day about this. And I really want to hear what your thoughts were back then.
My main thought while I was in Iraq was stay alive. Like just every day, stay alive. And you're with your band of like brothers and sisters. At that age, you don't have a political agenda. You're not having those kind of discussions. I mean, you're there from like a macro standpoint of, for the most part, like poor and lower middle class kids that are fighting a war over there, and you just stay alive. You do your tour, stay alive. And it was, when people ask me what it was like over in Iraq, it was like if you had a bunch of terrorists wanting to have like a pickup game that was a war. I mean, it wasn't just Iraqis. I mean, when other terrorists found out that Americans were coming over there, they're like, oh, we don't have to travel? Like, they're all coming over here. Like, let's just go over in this area. And it was just a giant dump, really. I mean, there was nothing green over there. There's a lot of deserts, and we were just having mortar rounds dropping on us every day. I mean, what's ironic is I got the best sleep I've ever gotten in my entire life, because you're so physically exhausted by the end of the day that your body just collapses. But I mean, that's what I signed up for. I mean, that was kind of one of the things in my life early on where I was like, I want to make a difference really early on. And then the rest of my life is kind of a cakewalk. I mean, I kind of used it as a backboard that I was like, all right, I went through this. Like, that was kind of the ceiling that I set. So, you have
what could be worse, right? Like, I did this. I mean, let me do this.
Yeah. It kind of puts everything in perspective too. I mean, when I got back from Iraq, I mean, man, when you saw like green grass and just there's so much beauty that you start to see when you're taking it out of those positions where it's la land. I mean, just the fact that we have so many just luxuries here that you're able to turn on a faucet and water comes out is crazy. I mean, it's just things that really opened up your perspective to, how other countries live and the liberties that are taken for granted.
I know we're in the same program with Benjamin Hardy, and we talk about mindset. We talk about having gratitude, being grateful. And when you talk about just being grateful of water and seeing green grass and having those experiences that you did in your younger self, and today, do you think that changed the way you just operate your life and your family life and life in general, that this is why you're 10 times more grateful?
I think it's certainly like one part of that recipe for sure. In another way, which I could never recommend to people like to do, is that when you're put in environments like that, where it's so physically, mentally, spiritually straining, that you start to pick up things that are beyond yourself, where you're amazed at who you are, but you never would have been able to find out those attributes of who you are without being put in those environments. And sometimes you're put in those environments unwillingly.
It's like an out-of-body experience, right?
Yeah, it's like a hardcore forcing function. It's just like if you wake up, and you think you're going to have a good day, and that day just really goes the complete opposite. And then at the end of the day, you look back and you're like, hey, I actually handled that really well, and I'm proud of myself. You never would have gotten that luxury of having that perspective had a lot of things go wrong, to be able to bring that out. So it's kind of, it's counterintuitive, but that's what, stuff with the Marines. I mean, I learned a lot of things in leadership, what to do. And I learned a lot of leadership of what not to do. And I got a front row seat to it. So I wanted to double dip. Honestly, I was like, hey, let me let me learn on both ends of this spectrum, not just what I think I like and I feel good and I resonate with. Let me look at the other end of this as far as how can I be a leader and set the example when it's not always for my benefit as an individual.
I mean, what you're speaking of is the mindset that you have, the mindset that you've created for yourself. It's because why you are where you are today. Because if you didn't have that mindset, you wouldn't be where you are today. And where you are today is a really successful, you're a CEO of a great company, Edgewater Group Company, which happened because you were in the Marines. Because after you got out of the Marines, you did the college bit. You're like, I'm done with that. It didn't work out. And just like me and many others listening to the show, totally get it. And then you go to an extreme level and you rehabilitate 70 buildings. You become this commercial guru. Talk to me about that. I mean, how do you transition from, you go to Iraq, you try some college, you're like, nah, I'm going to go and rehabilitate some buildings and get into this whole real estate piece and just blow it up to 7 million and beyond. Walk me through that. How do I get my head around that?
Probably at the core of it, I was really insecure about the grades, that I was getting in school. And so where my mindset went to be solution oriented was, okay, no one's going to hire me. I'm not going to get into a good school. I'm not going to get a good job for that. Let me try to hack this situation. Let me go straight to money. Let me figure out ways that I can build wealth and value where institutionalized education is not a part of the equation. And so I was very serious about my education while I was in the Marine Corps, that I took responsibility for it. And so I remember I would go to the library on base. I would start rewriting accounting books just so I could get muscle memory of understanding how a balance sheet and a P&L worked. I read every book I could on real estate. I saved every dime I could while I was in the Marines. I mean, and you got to get your haircut twice a week. So, I mean, your money's going in the Marines. It's very difficult. But so from there, I treated that like it was my college. And then when I got out, it just happened really step by step where I started just buying, smaller houses and learning from those mistakes and learning how to deal with contractors and even understanding cash flow and leverage and just, kind of like we talked about before, like just being of service without expecting a transaction. I would ask if I could just, learn from other brokers or investors, and I would do whatever they needed that I could help them out. And I think there's parts where initially when it happens to you, it feels like it's lucky. But when you start to look back at other things that you've done, it makes more sense. And so one of them is I got hooked up with 2 investors at an early age, and they didn't want to go out and buy houses. And so I was lucky enough to say, hey, for every 5 that I buy you, can I cherry pick and I can pick up a deal? And during that time frame of the real estate market, I mean, the floodgates were open, that there was a lot of sales going on. And even that couple year, I was able to pick up 30 or 40 houses for pennies on the dollar. And I mean, I was buying more houses than I could have afforded, but something told me, I mean, you're going to get, this is a one in a lifetime chance. Keep buying these things and stay true to yourself, no matter how frightened you are. And you just keep going. So I built up a, great real estate portfolio with residential and commercial, and you just keep learning. And I think reflection's a big part of that you're able to look back and say, hey, what did I do well? And what are some things that I can do better to take with me in the future? And that's an important, characteristic to have.
So it reminds me of, I got a little saying is people tell me, Scott, you're so lucky you had all these jobs, or, Matthew, you're so lucky. And it's funny, the harder I work, the luckier I get. It's like, really? So is it really lucky? I mean, because you don't stop. I mean, I read some articles about you, and one of the things you said many, many years ago to one of the articles you said to a reporter, you said, you don't stop working and you're going to try to change those behaviors. But probably, let me guess if I'm right, when you're working, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah, I'm kind of a wordsmith. So I think I focus more now on creating and being really clear on making sure that, I'm coming from a creator's mindset that is limiting the amount that I'm competing against people, where I'm looking for new ways to kind of rebirth and innovation. And that's, even with real estate, I didn't have really any competitors because I was buying a lot of things that people didn't want, but I saw a lot of things that people didn't see. And so I'm from upstate New York, where there was a lot of historical houses. And during the 70s and 80s in the South, historical houses got a really bad rap and people started dumping them and letting them go. And I mean, even during that time, these houses that I was picking up here, I mean, they're gorgeous, like Southern manors in downtown Greensboro that, in hindsight, I mean, people will tell me, they're like, gosh, I wish I would have picked that up. I wish I would have knew about. It was just one of those kind of areas where people are, I mean, they were terrified at the time and they don't want a big house that has big utility bills, or they would chop them up and make them multi-units, and they just didn't see it. So I think that's something where I want to keep working on is what am I seeing that people aren't seeing? And I mean, that with photography, right? Anybody can have a camera. Like there's a lot of variables that everybody has the same, but if you're able to see the picture that no one else is going to see before you take it, like that's creativity that can be leveraged in a huge way.
It's funny you mention that because I tell people this all the time. Like, oh, how can you be in the photography business? And like the iPhones and all these camera phones are so good. I'm like, it doesn't matter. It's not about the gear. I don't know how to build a house. You can give me the best camera, the best software. You're not going to get a good house out of me, right? But it doesn't matter because those people are skilled to do it. And same thing with these photographers, and the mindset is about, I like the way you say it, you don't work, it's about you creating things, right? That's exactly the mindset of a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of creative people, like you and I, that we don't work. I don't work, but my wife thinks I work all the time, right? But we create things. And what I do now is I help photographers create a business. And I've kind of changed my identity to do what I did in my past to help other people in the future. And that's to help people build a better business as a photographer. So it took me a little while to figure that out, but that's my purpose in life, is to help these creative people understand that there's an unlimited amount of work out there for creative people. And it's not about the gear. Don't get intimidated. Don't be, don't let that terrorize you. That, no, everybody has it. No, there's 8 billion people in the world. There's enough work there for good creative people that want to be creative. So yeah, that's a really good point. I like the way you say that, Matthew. I like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Monopoly game. I mean, there's never like a series of Monopoly that goes through the same way. It's never replicated the same way. There's just, the die can get dropped in so many different numbers that it changes, and industries are the same way. So that's why anytime that I feel like I'm competing or I'm coming from a place of scarcity, that's when I know it's an opportunity to reflect and say, okay, like, hey, where do I need to create and get back to this? And I've hit ceilings in different sectors where I was like, oh, I've been creative in the same way for too long, where it becomes basic economy. I'm doing what everybody else is doing. They caught up or I caught up, where I need to break some things. I need to stop doing some things that were giving me affirmation. But yeah, when you mention, it's interesting when I hear that or people talk about luck, that just seems like the easiest way to label or justify something until you like dig deep. When I look at things that I might be labeled as failures in the past, I've had so many of them, where a lot of people who I know that might live normal or, W-2 jobs, they've never failed really. They haven't failed in an entrepreneurial life. Whereas kind of the more that I fail, the more I respect and I endure that process of going through failure, creativity, rebirth, stagnation. And, when you start involving other people, I mean, it's just kind of a organic, beautiful thing. But I've failed so much that it's kind of laughable, it's just, if I'm not failing, I'm honestly kind of worried. Like, I got to think that over.
You must have been reading my mind, because just 2 days ago, I'm like, Scott, I'm talking to myself. I'm like, Scott, you're playing Monopoly. This is just a Monopoly game, right? Because if I let the money kind of get in my head, I'm losing the game, right? And yeah, this pandemic happened. A lot of businesses did great, other ones did bad. But I felt like I was at ground zero, to use this terminology that we're all used to. But I was at ground zero having an event business where I dealt with a very large amount of people to do events for photography. Companies like businesses, like even at the White House or the Super Bowl, or these really big events, it just disappeared. So when you're that far into the game, and it is a game, and you lose it all, you feel like a failure. But it took me a while to figure it out. No, this was all college for me. And I figured it out. Like, I was like the 1% of photographers building a 7-figure business, and people say they 7-figure. There's not that many people that actually have accomplished that. So a lot of people would just envy what I've done or what I've failed on. But those failures, I figured out that can be really great learning lessons for other people. This didn't happen to me. This happened for me, right? And all this loss and psychology point of it, this happened for me. It got me to the point right now where I'm doing 10 times more than I did as a photographer. And that was a great time at that time for National Geographic and Time Inc. and all these things. It was a great time, but I have more knowledge that I can help somebody take the fast pass, right? Take the fast pass and build a great creative business. If it's photography or whatever that case may be, like you said, creative business. And that's what business is. You got to be creative in order to survive, because there's going to be some downtimes like I've been through just recently, and we go through it, but you got to play the game, right?
When that's happened to me, and that's where like transformation is so valuable. I think like the ability for one person to be able to transform themselves is directly correlated to the amount of future success that they're able to have. And so when I look back at my downfalls, I had attached a lot of self-worth to a monthly income, where I was like, oh, I'm a good person. I'm of value if I'm hitting this amount of money. And then when that stops, I'm just like, it just pivoted the other way, where I was like, oh, this is a huge opportunity to really, reevaluate what I'm attaching myself to. And so I've gone through that period where I was just like, let me get really clear on the value that I have for myself. And the thing that I keep in mind is I'm not taking any of this with me. What am I leaving behind day to day that is really meaningful to me, that's going to be of service to other people? And when I really started working on that, it felt like I had this just this iron cloak just falling off of me. And I was becoming more and more free, where I wasn't in these attachments that were like, they owned me, and there was just so much fear involved around it, where I was like, this is not healthy and it's not scalable. And you just have to have some really honest conversations with yourself. And I think the more that you do that, I just felt like it's more and more of a beautiful thing, where I was like, I'm becoming more and more free from this, and free in a way where I'm not attaching myself to something else.
It's like our friend Ben Hardy goes, all progress starts by telling the truth. And like when he first said that to us, and we're on these calls every week, and and would say, all progress starts by telling the truth. I'm like, oh, that's a really nice line. But I kind of got into it like, no, Scott, psychologically, this is an amazing words that he's saying is all progress starts by telling the truth. Because you go through this period of either whatever the case may be. If it's making a ton of money, you have this mindset, oh, I can do anything, I got this, whatever it is for you. And you make up the stories you tell yourself. But the stories that you tell yourself that are actually true is going to help you move forward. And it's so important to understand that all progress starts by telling the truth, because it continues, you tell yourself lies that actually isn't reality. It's just going to continue to fall down the hill to the point you're like, it's going to explode. And it's so true. All progress starts by telling the truth to yourself. So
yeah, that was something I've had the luxury of working on, because when I think of that sentence, the first thing I say is, I'm like, okay, well, how am I being honest with myself, or am I telling me things that are just reaffirming what I'm doing now because that will be easy? So I really started just peeling away all these layers. And then what came about is I was telling cultural narratives that I was imposing on myself so I didn't be alone. Well, why don't you want to be alone? And you just keep peeling away these layers, and then you go through, fear and scarcity or insecurities. And then when it's so crazy, so when you're exposing those, it feels really uncomfortable, but because you're freeing yourself of that. And so some people don't know how that feels, because they hold those so tightly as, the armor that they wear, where it's like you actually have to open yourself up to be able to let that go. It's kind of a funeral. It's kind of a spiritual ceremony of just this might have served me at one point in my time with, sales or grinding or growth, but it hits a plateau where it can make you stagnant and it doesn't help you anymore. So that being truthful and being honest with what direction you want to go, it's super liberating. And it's it's changed my relationships just with people in general. I mean, I think, a negative culture can be contagious, and so can a positive one. And I think when people interact with me at Edgewater Group, they're like, he's not putting up a face, like, so we're more productive and efficiency for a bottom line. Like, he genuinely cares about me and us working together to make sure we're good on all fronts, not just ones that are related to financials. And people open up more and more, and then they start to set the example for that.
No, you're right. It's true. You get these people that, I'm the CEO, I'm this, and it's, call it ego. I don't know. Maybe I had it, maybe I didn't. I don't know. I don't think I did. But to be at that base level of like, when my company was at its peak and we had 53 employees, but nobody was ever an employee. Everybody was a team member. And I was never the boss. I was always a coach. And just those simple things changed the dynamics of how people interact. And like, no, Scott's all in it. Scott actually wants to help us. Scott's going to coach us so we can build a better photography business, because let's face it, I didn't think the 53 people that work for me were going to retire with me for the next 35 years. And it was a learning lesson. They were handpicked because of that reason, is they wanted to learn. It's like when you want to learn, all of a sudden the teacher shows up, right? So yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, that's so true. I went through years of that. I had an EOS coach sitting at a meeting with me once, and he leaned over and he said to me, "Do you have any idea what you look like right now?" And as soon as he said that, I knew exactly what he meant. Like, I always had a dead face, like a deadpan look on my face. Like, I didn't trust anybody. I was constantly auditing. I was constantly, like, my wheels were running in the back of my head. Like, I was emotionally suffocating in my business because it had just gotten away from me. Like, things were not right. And it was just so interesting. Like, I remember that being a turning point, because that could be interpreted in so many ways. But just as soon as he said that, we were all eating lunch together. And he just said, "Do you have any idea what you look like right now?" And I was just like, boom, he spotted me.
Yeah.
I was just screaming for help. Yeah, I was just like.
That's great. Yeah, it's nice to go at the time. I have those moments, and when you have those moments, and people that'll listen probably can relate to this, but when you have those pinnacle points, right? They're just what I call game-changing points in my life. It's the tipping point of something new to happen, right? It's a whole tipping point. And it's just like, it just streaks out like a bright light to me. It's like, I'm at a tipping point. It's really cool. Hey, so we're on, for the people listening, we're actually not really in a cafe. We're on kind of a Zoom call watching each other. And I see Mathew every week on our weekly calls. And I see his office, and I was always kind of intrigued. You listen to it. You ever been in a Zoom call, and you look at everybody on the Zoom call, and you're like, oh, look at that background, or look at this background, or who's doing what, or what's going on. So Mathew has the same background. It's actually his office. And you kind of like want to look around the artwork behind him. And until I got to know Mathew and did a little research, his artwork around him, behind him, has a lot to do with who he is. And not only who he is, but during that whole time when he was picking up properties and doing different things, and his former life was in the Marines, you got to talk to me, you got to walk me through this, but his office is in a church. He renovated church as his office. That's his office. And not only that, what I find intriguing is his office address after being in the military, in the Marines, as a machine gunist. His address is Old Battleground Ave. Talk about a full circle. Did you plan this? I think it's just part of you. It was going to happen. It didn't happen to you. It happened for you, right? This is where you're supposed to be.
It's funny. I never thought of the Old Battleground Road till you brought it up. I was like, oh, that's crazy. How the great wheel spins. Yeah.
How many years have you been there? Since 2018?
Yeah, I think she's probably coming up on 6 years now. Yeah.
6 years, and Coffee with Scott just came up that your address is Battleground Ave, and you were in the battleground as a Marine.
They had a Nathaniel Green. It's right down the road. It was the battle happened, and it's a big park. This is a 1913 Methodist church that was put here, and it's pretty cool because some of like the people who used to come here as kids, like the FedEx guy, he used to come here and stuff like that. And we always have people randomly stop by. They're like, "What are you doing here?" Like, because we have cool like street art on the side of it, like also, and things like that. But it's just, I wanted to make a place for not just myself, but people who work here, that they feel lucky coming here to work, like they show up and they're just like, what a cool, fun spot to work with. And we just have such a great culture here.
I'm big on my office. Like my office has to be just so I have to have nice artwork on the walls. My office is very clean, very organized, so I can really stay focused and just enjoy the environment that I'm in. And everybody that walks into my office, they go, wow, this is really nice. I'm like, yeah, it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to feel good here. It's supposed to be a good place that you're supposed to be at, right? So I was big on that years ago. And so I love that you bring that culture in, and you're going back to the old battlegrounds and bringing all that back is a really positive thing in your life, and you're helping other people. I mean, talk about extraordinary people. Hopefully that, I can't believe that Coffee with Scott brought you to that realization that your office is on Battleground Ave. That's awesome. That's really great.
We have Battleground Road, which is right outside. So it's actually kind of confusing for a lot of people that we go down there. But yeah, it's a fun little tucked away, church. And I don't know what it's going to be eventually, because I have some other office buildings in downtown Greensboro that I think I might move in later on. But I don't know. I'm really thinking just kind of like a gathering place or something. Post-COVID, I like to think we can have like an opportunity for people to, keep socializing or having a fun spot or something. But I never plan on selling it. So I'll either, give it away or have it become, some kind of nonprofit for veterans in the future.
We have a great coffee shop here in Boston, and it's called Battlegrounds Coffee Shop. Okay. And this is probably why it kind of went off in my mind. They're a young couple, and they're just great people. He was in the Marines, and he opened up this coffee shop, and his coffee shop went viral on social media because he wanted to help, anybody in the military. And you buy coffee off his website as well as his physical stores, right? That he helps Marines and veterans in all aspects. But all the veterans got together, and they just so part of his whole coffee shop and his whole mindset of Battlegrounds Coffee Shop and helping people. And he has people come in and has little concerts and playing the music and have that vibe of just really great place. You just want to go. I mean, the coffee could suck, but you just want to go, right? But gratefully, the coffee's fantastic, but it's just a great place. That's awesome. So, hey, I just want to wrap up. I know you're a busy guy, and it looks like there's a lot of people waiting for our seats here in the cafe. But I just want to say thanks for taking this time, and this will live on the World Wide Web, the internet.
Nice, I like it.
Many years, and years from now, I actually believe that somebody will listen to these words, and I really believe that it'll change just one person's point of view in life, and that's my goal to do these podcast to speak to really extraordinary people, because I'm very fortunate to really meet some great people, and I just want to share the people that I meet with other people, and that's my goal. And if you're listening to this, pass it on to somebody else. If you got any value out of it, fantastic, but you just need one thing, just one little thing you can pull out of this, and have a great day and have a great cup of coffee. It's all good. Thanks, Matthew.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.